the world's women and girls. Excellencies, rampant gender-based discrimination and abuse are the most prevalent inequality across all societies. Every day, it seems that we are confronted by yet more sickening cases of femicide, gender-based violence, and mass rape, both in peacetime and as a weapon of war. In some countries, laws are being used to threaten reproductive health and rights. And in Afghanistan, laws are being used to lock in the systematic oppression of women and girls. And I am sorry to observe that despite years of talk, gender inequality is on full display. Please forgive me, it's on full display in this hall as well. Less than 10% of speakers during this week's general debate are women. This is unacceptable, especially when we know that gender equality delivers for peace, sustainable development, climate action, and much more. That is precisely why we took targeted measures to achieve gender parity among the United Nations senior leadership. This is a goal that we have already achieved. It's doable. I call on male-dominated political and economic establishments around the world to do it as well. Excellencies, global inequalities are reflected and reinforced even in our own global institutions. The United Nations Security Council was designed by the victors of the Second World War. At the time, most of the African continent was still under colonial domination. To this day, Africa has no permanent seat on the world's preeminent Council of Peace. This must change. So must the global financial architecture set up 80 years ago. I commend the leaders of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund for taking the important steps that they have. But, as the Pact for the Future emphasizes, tackling inequalities requires accelerating reform of the international financial architecture. Over the past 8 decades, the global economy has grown and transformed. The Bretton Woods institutions have not kept pace. They can no longer provide a global safety net or offer developing countries the level of support that they need. In the world's poorest countries, the debt interest payments now cost more on average than investments in education, health, and infrastructure combined. And around the world, more than 80% of Sustainable Development Goal targets are off track. Excellencies, getting back on track requires a surge of financing for the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. That means that G20 countries need to lead on an SDG stimulus of $500 billion a year. It means reforms to substantially increase the lending capacity of multilateral development banks and to enable them to massively scale up affordable long-term climate and development finance. It means expanding contingency financing through recycling of special drawings, and it means promoting long-term debt restructuring. Excellencies, I have no illusions about the obstacles to reform of the multilateral system. Those with political and economic power, or those who believe they have that power, are always reluctant to change. But the status quo is already draining their power. Without reform, fragmentation is inevitable, and global institutions will become less legitimate, less credible, and less effective.
Excellencies, the third driver of our unsustainable world is uncertainty. The ground is shifting under our feet. Anxiety levels are off the charts, and young people in particular are counting on us and seeking solutions. Uncertainty is compounded by two existential threats: the climate crisis and the rapid advance of technology, in particular artificial intelligence. Excellencies, we are in a climate meltdown. Extreme temperatures, raging fires, droughts, and epic floods are not natural disasters. They are human disasters, increasingly fueled by fossil fuels. No country is spared. But the poorest and most vulnerable are hardest hit. Climate hazards are blowing a hole through the budgets of many African countries, costing up to 5% of GDP every year. And this is just the start. We are on course to careen past the global limit of a 1.5 degree temperature rise. But as the problem gets worse, solutions are getting better. Renewable prices are plummeting, rollout is accelerating, and lives are being transformed by affordable, accessible, clean energy. Renewables don't just generate power, they generate jobs, wealth, energy security, and a path out of poverty for millions. But developing countries cannot be plundered in that journey. Our panel on critical minerals has recommended fair and sustainable ways to meet global demand for these resources, which are essential to the renewables revolution. Excellencies, a future without fossil fuel is certain. A fair and fast transition is not. That is in your hands. By next year, every country must produce an ambitious new national climate action plan or national determined contributions. And this must bring national energy strategies, sustainable development priorities, and climate ambitions together. They must align with 1.5 degree limit, cover the whole economy, and contribute to every one of the COP28 energy transition targets. An International Energy Agency report released today breaks this down. By 2035, on average, advanced economies must slash energy emissions 80% and the emerging markets 65%. The G20 is responsible for 80% of total emissions. They must lead the charge, keeping with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in the light of different national circumstances. But these must be done with a joint effort, pooling resources, scientific capacities, and proven and affordable technologies for all to be able to reach those targets. I'm honored to be working closely with President Lula of Brazil, who is both G20 chair and COP30 host, to secure maximum ambition, acceleration, and cooperation. We just met for that purpose. Finance is essential. COP29 is around the corner. It must deliver a significant new finance goal. And we also need a loss and damage fund that meets the scale of the challenge and developed countries meeting their adaptation finance promises. And we must finally flip the script on a crazy situation. We continue to reward polluters to wreck our planet. The fossil fuel industry continues to pocket massive profits and subsidies, while everyday people bear the costs of climate catastrophe, from rising insurance premiums to lost livelihoods. I call on G20 countries to shift money from fossil fuel subsidies and investments to a just energy transition, to put an effective price on carbon, and to implement new and innovative sources of financing, including solidarity levies on fossil fuel extraction through legally binding, transparent mechanisms. All by next year, and this taking into account that those who shoulder the blame must foot the bill. Polluters must pay. Excellencies, the rapid rise of new technologies poses another unpredictable existential risk. Artificial intelligence will change virtually everything we know, from work, education, and communication to culture and politics. We know AI is rapidly advancing, but where is it taking us? To more freedom or more conflict? To a more sustainable world or greater inequality? To being better informed or easier to manipulate? A handful of companies and even individuals have already amassed enormous power over the development of AI with little accountability or oversight for the moment. Without a global approach to its management, artificial intelligence could lead to artificial divisions across the board. A great fracture with two internets, two markets, two economies, with every country forced to pick a side and enormous consequences for all. The United Nations is the universal platform for dialogue and consensus. It is uniquely placed to promote cooperation on AI based on the values of the Charter and international law. The global debate happens here, or it does not happen. And I welcome important first steps. Two resolutions in the General Assembly, the Global Digital Compact, and the recommendations of the high-level body on AI can lay the foundations for inclusive governance of AI. Let's move forward together to make AI a force for good. Excellencies, nothing lasts forever. But the feature of human life is that it appears otherwise. The current order always feels fixed until it is not. Across human history, we see empires rising and falling, old certainties crumbling, tectonic shifts in global affairs. Today, our course is unsustainable. It is in all our interests to manage the epic transformations underway, to choose the future we want, and to guide our world towards it. Many have said that the divisions and differences today are just too great, that it is impossible for us to come together for the common good. You proved that is not true. The Summit of the Future showed that with a spirit of dialogue and compromise, we can join forces to steer our world to a more sustainable path. It is not the end. It is the start of a journey, a compass in the whirlwind. Let's keep going. Let's move our world towards less impunity and more accountability, less inequality and justice, less uncertainty and more opportunity. The people of the world are looking to us, and succeeding generations will look back on us. Let them find us on the side of the United Nations Charter, on the side of our shared values and principles, and on the right side of history. And I thank you.
I thank the Secretary General. The Assembly will now turn to agenda item 8, entitled General Debate. Excellencies, heads of state and government, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, honorable ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I extend a heartfelt welcome to the delegations from member states, observers, and esteemed guests. It is my profound honor and privilege to welcome you to this august hall for the general debate of the 79th session of the General Assembly. Before I proceed, I would like to recognize the presence here today of 9 of my predecessors, past presidents of the General Assembly. Although barely 2 weeks in the job, I can already appreciate the challenges they navigated through. The general debate remains one of the world's most inclusive, representative, and authoritative platforms for global reflection and collective action. This year, the urgency of our task cannot be overstated. We are falling behind in our pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals. I am informed that with just 5 years to go, less than 18% of the goals have been achieved. Also, the climate crisis is no longer a distant threat. It is here now, ravaging ecosystems and dismantling the livelihoods of entire communities. Conflicts rage from the Middle East to Ukraine, from Haiti to South Sudan, leaving in their wake death, destruction, and immense suffering. I call for an immediate ceasefire in all these conflict settings. For almost a year now, the people of Gaza and Israel have been caught in a spiraling cycle of conflict and retribution. I take this opportunity to call for an immediate ceasefire for the Hamas-Israel war, the unconditional release of hostages, and for all parties to abide by international law, including international humanitarian law, and work towards a just and lasting solution grounded in the United Nations Charter, relevant resolutions, and international law ensuring dignity for both Palestinians and Israelis. Indeed, only a two-state solution can end the cycle of violence and instability, ensuring peace, security, and dignity for both Palestinians and Israelis. Excellencies, we should be coming together for peace and the well-being of our citizens. We should not divert essential resources into military stockpiles, never before seen since the Cold War era. Nuclear weapons continue to be a threat to humanity and to our planet. A nuclear war must never be fought. Conditions for their use or accidental explosion must always be avoided. We call for urgent measures for the abolition of these tools of the annihilation of the human race and our environment. Old hatreds rooted in prejudice and ignorance persist, and new divisions arise where none should exist. In the recent past, mistrust among states has grown steadily, complicating prospects for peaceful settlement of interstate disputes. It is time to invest more in building trust and practicing dialogue. Constant dialogue is a powerful weapon for all governments have in their hands. Trust and dialogue are integral parts of our human dignity and precondition for lasting peace and security. Excellencies, gender equality remains a distant goal as many women and girls around the world continue to be denied their basic rights, justice, and opportunities. Globally, we witness a troubling regression in the protection of human rights and human dignity. Millions remain trapped in poverty, their lives restricted by forces beyond their control. Forced labor and modern slavery, extending even to young boys and girls of school age, are an insult to human dignity. They must be combated in every society at all times. Excellencies, there is an urgent need to reform the international financial system as too many countries remain burdened by crippling debt, forced to choose between servicing loans and improving the lives of their citizens. Meanwhile, the digital divide continues to widen, cutting off entire populations from the tools needed to succeed in the 21st century. Excellencies, we are not mere spectators of these crises, nor are we powerless to act. Within this hall are the leaders and representatives of the world's nations, the very people with the authority and responsibility to shape the course of our shared future. At our disposal is one of the most powerful tools for positive change: international cooperation grounded in the undeniable truth that even the most powerful nation cannot solve these complex borderless challenges alone. This truth was reaffirmed through our efforts at the Summit of the Future and the consensus adoption of the Pact of the Future. The Pact of the Future charts a path forward, reinvigorating our multilateral institutions with renewed energy, focus, and clarity to meet the demands of a rapidly changing world. Let us build on this momentum. Excellencies, a better world begins with unlocking the potential of we, the peoples of the world. Freedom and good governance ensure that no one, no individual, no community is left behind. In this endeavor, we must never overlook the challenges faced by the small island developing states, the landlocked developing states, the least developing countries, and the small states. It is incumbent on the United Nations to do more than just express solidarity. Specific programs responding to the unique situations in which these groups of states find themselves must be envisaged. This will be a priority of my presidency. Africa is one of the priorities of the United Nations. We must support Africa. The African Union's Agenda 2063 presents a bold and transformative vision for the continent. Africa currently has the youngest population in the world, and by 2063, 1 in 4 people will be African. The generation of resources for the well-being of these peoples has been much slower than the population growth. We must not let Africa's potential go unrealized. In fact, to truly unlock Africa's vast potential, we must actively cultivate global partnerships that align with the continent's aspirations and drive its success. In this endeavor, I look forward to working with member states of the United Nations this year on keeping Africa at the heart of our agenda. Excellencies, in this 79th session, I also want to prioritize multilingualism as a recognition of our world's cultural and linguistic richness. We understand that the multitude of languages, cultures, and perspectives should not be viewed as a source of division, but as a wellspring of strength. Excellencies, we anticipate a very successful high-level week. In addition to the recently concluded Summit of the Future and this ongoing general debate, several critical high-level events are expected to take place. These include the high-level event on microbial resistance, the high-level meeting on addressing the existential threats posed by sea level rise, and the high-level plenary meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. Throughout the 79th session, we will address the urgent issues of our time. While we may not agree on every issue, we all share the same fundamental goal: to build a better world for everyone, everywhere. Here today are representatives from 193 member states, each embodying our collective aspirations, each guided by a shared vision. The path ahead is difficult, fraught with obstacles that may at times seem insurmountable, but they are not impassable. We have the tools, the knowledge, and the collective will to overcome these challenges if we act together with courage and conviction. Thank you. Before giving the floor to the first speaker for this morning, I would like to remind members that the list of speakers for the general debate has been established on the agreed basis that statements should be no longer than 15 minutes to enable all the speakers to be heard at a given meeting. Within this time frame, I would like to appeal to speakers to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace so that interpretation into other official United Nations languages may be provided properly. I would also like to draw your attention to the decision taken by the General Assembly at previous sessions, namely, that the practice of expressing congratulations inside the General Assembly Hall after a speech has been delivered is strongly discouraged. After delivering their statements from the rostrum, speakers are invited to exit the General Assembly Hall through room GA 200, located behind the podium, before returning to their seats. May I take it that the General Assembly agrees to proceed in this manner? It is so decided. Finally, I should like to draw the attention of members that during the general debate, official photographs of all the speakers are taken by the Department of Global Communications. Members interested in obtaining these photographs are requested to contact the Photo Library of the United Nations. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Meus cumprimentos.
My greetings to the President of the General Assembly, Mr. Yang. I would like to greet the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and each of the heads of state and government and delegates present. I'd like to address specifically to the Palestinian delegation who is taking part in this opening session for the first time a bit as an observer member. I'd like to also mention President Abbas attending this meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, the day before yesterday, here in this very plenary, we adopted the Pact for the Future. Its difficult approval shows the weakening of our collective capacity for negotiation and dialogue. Its limited scope is also an expression of the paradox of our time. We walk around in circles between possible commitments that lead to insufficient results. Not even with the tragedy of COVID-19 were we able to unite around a treaty on pandemics at the World Health Organization. We need to go much further and provide the UN with the necessary means to face the dizzying changes in the international panorama. We are living in a time of growing anguish, frustration, tension, and fear. We are witnessing an alarming escalation of geopolitical disputes and strategic rivalries. 2023 holds the sad record of the highest number of conflicts since World War II. Global military spending grew for the 9th consecutive year and reached $2.4 trillion. Over $90 billion have been mobilized with nuclear arsenals. These resources could have been used to finance the fight against hunger and climate change. What we are seeing is an increase in military capabilities. The use of force, not supported by international law, is becoming the rule. We are witnessing two simultaneous conflicts with the potential to become widespread conflagrations. In Ukraine, with regret, we are seeing the war extending without any prospect of peace. Brazil has firmly condemned the invasion of the Ukrainian territory. It is already clear that neither side will be able to achieve all their objectives through military means. The use of increasingly destructive weapons brings to the mind the darkest days of their sterile Cold War confrontation. Creating conditions for resuming direct dialogue between the parties is crucial at this time. This is a message of the 6 points of understanding that China and Brazil offer for a process of dialogue to be established and for the hostilities to end. In Gaza and the West Bank, we are witnessing one of the greatest humanitarian crises in recent history, which is now spreading dangerously to Lebanon. What began as a terrorist action by fanatics against innocent Israeli civilians has become a collective punishment for the entire Palestinian people. There have been over 40,000 fatal victims, mostly women and children. The right to defense has become the right to vengeance, which prevents an agreement for the release of hostages and postpones the ceasefire. Forgotten conflicts in Sudan and Yemen are causing excruciating suffering to nearly 30 million people. This year, the number of people in need of humanitarian aid in the world will reach 300 million. In times of increasing polarization, expressions such as deglobalization and decoupling have become commonplace, but it is impossible to deplanetize our life together. We're doomed to climate change interdependence. The planet is no longer waiting to demand payment for the next generation and is fed up with unfulfilled climate agreements. It is tired of neglected carbon reduction targets and financial aid to poor countries that does not arrive. Denialism succumbs to evidence of global warming. 2024 is on track to be the hottest year in modern history. Hurricanes in the Caribbean, typhoons in Asia, Droughts and floods in Africa, torrential rains in Europe leave a trail of death and destruction. In the south of Brazil, we had the biggest flood since 1941. The Amazon is experiencing the worst drought in 45 years. The forest fires have spread across the country and have already devoured 5 million hectares in August alone. My government does not outsource responsibilities, nor does it abdicate its sovereignty. We have done already a lot, but we know that much more needs to be done. In addition to facing the challenge of climate crisis, we're fighting against those who profit with environmental degradation. We will not tolerate environmental crimes, illegal mining, and organized crime. We reduced the deforestation of the Amazon by 50% in the last year, and we will eradicate it by 2030. It is no longer acceptable to think about solutions for tropical forests without listening to the indigenous peoples, traditional communities, and all those that live in them. Our sustainable development vision is based on the potential of the bioeconomy. Brazil will host COP30 in 2025, convinced that multilateralism is the only way to overcome the climate emergency. Our nationally determined contribution, NDC, will be presented later this year in line with the goal of limiting the increase of the planet's temperature to 1.5 degrees. Brazil stands out as a source of opportunities in this world revolutionized by energy transition. Today, we are one of the countries with the cleanest energy mix. 90% of our electricity comes from renewable sources such as biomass, hydroelectrical power, solar power, and wind power. We made the choice for biofuels 50 years ago, long before the discussion about alternative energies gained traction. We are on the forefront of other important niches, such as green hydrogen production. It is time to face the debate about the slow pace of the planet's decarbonization and work for an economy less reliant on fossil fuels. Mr. President, Latin America has been experienced since a second lost decade since 2014. The region's average growth during this period was only just 0.9%, less than half of what was seen in the last decade of the 80s. This combination of low growth and high levels of inequality results in harmful effects on the political landscape. Engulfed by disputes often unrelated to the region, our vocation for cooperation and understanding has been weakened. It is unjustified keeping Cuba on a unilateral list of states that allegedly promote terrorism. And also that this is undue, this in Haiti, it reaches the most vulnerable countries. In Haiti, it's urgent to combine actions to restore public order and promote development. In Brazil, defending democracy implies impermanent action against extremist, messianic, and totalitarian attacks, which spread hatred, intolerance, and resentment. It was on its behalf that Brazilians defeated dictators and tyrants who tried to undermine institutions and put them at the service of reactionary interests. Democracy needs to respond to the legitimate aspiration of those who no longer accept hunger, inequality, unemployment, and violence. In a globalized world, it makes no sense to resort to false patriots and isolationists, nor is there hope in resorting to ultra-liberal experiments that only worsen the difficulties of an impoverished continent. The future of our region depends above all on building a sustainable, efficient, and inclusive state that tackles all forms of discrimination. A future which is not intimidated by individuals, corporations, or digital platforms that consider themselves above the law. Freedom is the first victim of a world with no rules. Essential elements of sovereignty includes the right to prescribe laws adjudicate disputes and enforce rules within one's territory, including the digital environment. The state we are building is sensitive to the needs of the most vulnerable without giving up sound macroeconomic foundations. The false opposition between state and market was abandoned by developed nations, which returned to practice active industrial policies and strong regulation of the domestic economy. In the area of artificial intelligence, we are experiencing the consolidation of the asymmetries that lead to a true knowledge oligopoly. The unprecedented concentration in the hands of a small number of people and companies based in an even smaller number of countries is advancing. We are interested in emancipatory artificial intelligence, which also has the face of the global south and which strengthens cultural diversity, that respects human rights, protects personal data, and promotes information integrity. And above all, that it will be a tool for peace, not for war. We need an intergovernment governance of the artificial intelligence in which all states have a seat. Mr. President, conditions for accessing financial resources remain prohibitive for most low and middle income countries. The debt burden limits fiscal room to invest in health and education, reduce inequalities, and address climate change. African countries borrow at rates up to 8 times higher than Germany and 4 times higher than the United States. It's a Marshall Plan in reverse, in which the poorest finance the richest. Without greater participation of the developing countries in the management of the IMF and the World Bank, there will be no effective change. While the Sustainable Development Goals lag behind, the world's 150 largest companies have collectively made up to $1 trillion in profits over the last 2 years. The fortunes of the top 5 billionaires have more than doubled since the start of this decade, while 60% of humanity has become poor. The super rich pay proportionally much less tax than the working class. To remedy this anomaly, Brazil has insisted on international cooperation to develop minimum global taxation standards. The data released by FAO 2 months ago on the state of food insecurity in the world is shocking. The number of people going hungry around the world has increased by more than 152 million since 2019. This means that 9% of the world's population, 733 million people, are undernourished. The problem is severe in Africa and Asia, but it also persists in parts of Latin America. Women and girls make up the majority of people facing hunger in the world. Pandemics, armed conflicts, climate events, and agricultural subsidies from rich countries are increasing the scope of this scourge. But hunger is not just the result of external factors. It arises above all from political choices. Today, the world produces more than enough food to eradicate it. What is missing is for conditions to be created so that food may be affordable. This is my government's most urgent commitment: end hunger in Brazil, as we did in 2014. In 23 alone, we lifted 24,400,000 people out of a condition of severe food insecurity. The Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, which we will launch in Rio de Janeiro in November, was born from this political will and this spirit of solidarity. It will be one of the main results of the Brazilian G20 chairmanship and is open to the world. Anyone who wants to join this collective effort is welcome. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, about to turn 80, the United Nations Charter has never undergone comprehensive reform. Only 4 amendments were passed, all of them between 1965 and 1973. The Charter's current version fails to address some of humanity's most pressing challenges. When the UN was founded, we were 51 countries. We are now 193 countries. Several countries, mainly on the African continent, were under colonial rule when the UN was founded and had no say over its goals and functioning. There is no gender balance in the highest positions. The position of Secretary General has never been held by a woman. We are approaching the end of the first quarter of the 21st century, with the United Nations increasingly empty and paralyzed. It is time to react vigorously to this situation, restoring to the organization the prerogatives that derive from its status as a universal forum. One-off adjustments are not enough. We need to think about reviewing and revising the Charter comprehensively. The reform should include the following goals: transforming the Economic and Social Council into the main forum for dealing with sustainable development and the fight against climate change with a real capacity to inspire financial institutions. Revitalizing the role of the General Assembly, including in matters of international peace and security. Strengthening of the Peace Building Commission. Reform of the Security Council, focusing on its composition, working methods, and veto powers in order to make it more effective and representative of contemporary realities. Excluding Latin America and Africa from the permanent seats of the Security Council is an unacceptable echo of domination practices from the colonial past. Let's promote this discussion in a transparent way. Let's promote this discussion in a transparent way in consultation with the G77, the G20, and the BRICS, in the CARICOM, at the UE, and any other spaces that exist. I have no illusions about the complexity of a reform like this, which will face crystallized interests in maintaining the status quo. It will require enormous negotiation effort, but that is our responsibility. We cannot wait for another world tragedy like the World War II to only then build a new governance on its rubbles. The will of the majority can persuade those who cling to the raw expression of the mechanisms of power. The humanities aspirations echo in this plenary. Here, we engage in the world's big debates. In this forum, we look for answers to the problems inflicted on the world. It is up to the General Assembly, the biggest expression of multilateralism, the mission to pave the way for the future. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Federative Republic of Brazil, say they're checking a few things before. He's here, but I think they're checking a few things. I don't know.
just driving another minute.
The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Joseph R. Biden Jr., President of the United States of America. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
My fellow leaders, today is the fourth time I've had the great honor of speaking to this assembly as President of the United States. It'll be my last. I've seen a remarkable sweep of history. I was first elected office in the United States of America as a U.S. Senator in 1972. Now, I know I look like I'm only 40. I know that. I was 29 years old. Back then, we were living through an inflection point, a moment of tension and uncertainty. The world was divided by the Cold War. The Middle East was headed toward war. America was at war in Vietnam. At that point, the longest war in America's history. Our country was divided and angry, and there were questions about our staying power and our future. But even then, I entered public life not out of despair, but out of optimism. The United States and the world got through that moment. It wasn't easy or simple without significant setbacks. But we go on to reduce the threat of nuclear weapons through arms control, and then go on to bring the Cold War itself to an end. Israel and Egypt went to war, but then forged a historic peace. We ended the war in Vietnam. The last year in Hanoi, I met with the Vietnamese leadership. We elevated our partnership to the highest level. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity for reconciliation. That today, the United States and Vietnam are partners and friends. And it's proof that even from the horrors of war, there's a way forward. Things can get better. We should never forget that. I've seen that throughout my career. In the 1980s, I spoke out against apartheid in South Africa. And then I watched the racist regime fall. In the 1990s, I worked to hold Milosevic accountable for war crimes. He was held accountable. At home, I wrote and passed the Violence Against Women Act to end the scourge of violence against women and girls, not only in America, but across the world, as many of you have as well. But we have so much more to do, especially against rape and sexual violence as weapons of war and terror. We were attacked on 9/11 by Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. We brought him justice. Then I came to the presidency at another moment of crisis and uncertainty. I believed America had to look forward. New challenges, new threats, new opportunities were in front of us. We needed to put ourselves in a position to see the threats, to deal with the challenges, and to seize the opportunities as well. We need to end the era of war that began on 9/11. As Vice President to President Obama, he asked me to work to wind down the military operations in Iraq, and we did, painful as it was. When I came to office as president, Afghanistan had replaced Vietnam as America's longest war. I was determined to end it, and I did. It was a hard decision, but the right decision. 4 American presidents had faced that decision, but I was determined not to leave it to the 5th. It was a decision accompanied by tragedy. 13 brave Americans lost their lives, along with hundreds of Afghans in a suicide bomb. I think those lost lives, I think of them every day. I think of all the 2,461 U.S. military deaths over a long 20 years of that war. 20,744 American servicemen wounded in action. I think of their service, their sacrifice, and their heroism. I know other countries lost their own men and women fighting alongside us. We honor their sacrifices as well. To face the future, I was also determined to rebuild my country's alliances and partnerships to a level not previously seen. We did just that, from traditional treaty alliances to new partnerships like the Quad with the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. I know many look at the world today and see difficulties and react with despair, but I do not. I won't. As leaders, we don't have the luxury. I recognize the challenges from Ukraine to Gaza to Sudan and beyond. War, hunger, terrorism, brutality, record displacement of people, a climate crisis, democracy at risk, strains within our societies, the promise of artificial intelligence and its significant risk. The list goes on. But maybe because all I've seen and all we have done together over the decades, I have hope. I know there is a way forward. In 1919, the Irish poet William Butler Yeats described a world, and I quote, "where things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world," end of quote. Some may say those words describe the world not just in 1919, but in 2024. But I see a critical distinction. In our time, the center has held. Leaders and people from every region and across the political spectrum have stood together, turned the page. We turned the page on the worst pandemic in a century. We made sure COVID no longer controls our lives. We defended the UN Charter and ensured the survival of Ukraine as a free nation. My country made the largest investment in climate, clean energy, ever anywhere in history. There will always be forces that pull our countries apart and the world apart. Aggression, extremism, chaos, and cynicism. A desire to retreat from the world and go it alone. Our task, our test, is to make sure that the forces holding us together are stronger than those who are pulling us apart. That the principles of partnership that we came here each year to uphold can withstand the challenges. That the center holds once again. My fellow leaders, I truly believe we're at another inflection point in world history. For the choices we make today will determine our future for decades to come. Will we stand behind the principles that unite us? Will we stand firm against aggression? Will we end the conflicts that are raging today? Will we take on global challenges like climate change, hunger, and disease? Will we plan now for the opportunities and risk of a revolutionary new technologies? I want to talk today about each of these decisions and the actions, in my view, we must take. To start, each of us in this body has made a commitment to the principles of the UN Charter to stand up against aggression. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we could have stood by and merely protested. But Vice President Harris and I understood that that was an assault on everything this institution is supposed to stand for. And so, my direction, America stepped into the breach, providing massive security and economic and humanitarian assistance. Our NATO allies and partners in 50-plus nations stood up as well. But most importantly, the Ukrainian people stood up. I asked the people of this chamber to stand up for them. The good news is Putin's war has failed and at his core aim. He set out to destroy Ukraine, but Ukraine is still free. He set out to weaken NATO, but NATO is bigger, stronger, and more united than ever before, with 2 new members, Finland and Sweden. But we cannot let up. The world now has another choice to make. Will we sustain our support to help Ukraine win this war and preserve its freedom, or walk away and let aggression be renewed and a nation be destroyed? I know my answer. We cannot grow weary. We cannot look away. And we will not let up on our support for Ukraine, not until Ukraine wins a just and durable peace in the UN Charter. We also need to uphold our principles as we seek to responsibly manage the competition with China so it does not veer into conflict. We stand ready to cooperate on urgent challenges for the good of our people and the people everywhere. We recently resumed cooperation with China to stop the flow of deadly synthetic narcotics. I appreciate the collaboration. It matters for the people of my country and many others around the world. On matters of conviction, the United States is unabashed, pushing back against unfair economic competition against military coercion of other nations and in the South China Sea, and maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits, and protecting our most advanced technologies so they cannot be used against us or any of our partners. At the same time, we're going to continue to strengthen our network of alliances and partnerships across the Indo-Pacific. These partnerships are not against any nation. They're building blocks for a free, open, secure, and peaceful Indo-Pacific. We're also working to bring greater measure of peace and stability to the Middle East. The world must not flinch from the horrors of October 7th. Any country would have the right and responsibility to ensure that such an attack can never happen again. Thousands of armed Hamas terrorists invaded a sovereign state, slaughtering and massacring more than 1,200 people, including 46 Americans, in their homes and at a music festival. Despicable acts of sexual violence, 250 innocents taken hostage. I've met with the families of those hostages. I've grieved with them. They're going through hell. Innocent civilians in Gaza are also going through hell. Thousands and thousands killed, including aid workers. Too many families dislocated, crowding into tents, facing a dire humanitarian situation. They did not ask for this war that Hamas started. I put forward with Qatar and Egypt a ceasefire and hostage deal. It's been endorsed by the UN Security Council. Now is the time for the parties to finalize its terms, bring the hostages home, and secure security for Israel and Gaza free of Hamas' grip, ease the suffering in Gaza, and end this war. October 7th, since October 7th, we've also been determined to prevent a wider war that engulfs the entire region. Hezbollah, unprovoked, joined the October 7th attack, launching rockets into Israel. Almost a year later, too many on each side of the Israeli-Lebanon border remain displaced. Full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. Even if the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution is still possible. In fact, it remains the only path to lasting security to allow the residents from both countries to return to their homes and the border safely. And that's what we're working tirelessly to achieve. As we look ahead, we must also address the rise of violence against innocent Palestinians on the West Bank and set the conditions for a better future, including a two-state solution where Israel enjoys security and peace and full recognition and normalized relations with all its neighbors, where Palestinians live in security, dignity, and self-determination in a state of their own. Progress toward peace will put us in a stronger position to deal with the ongoing threat posed by Iran. Together, we must deny oxygen to its terrorist proxies, which have called for more October 7th and ensure that Iran will never, ever obtain a nuclear weapon. Gaza is not the only conflict that deserves our outrage. In Sudan, a bloody civil war unleashed one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. 8 million on the brink of famine. Hundreds of thousands already there. Atrocities in Darfur and elsewhere. The United States has led the world in providing humanitarian aid to Sudan. And with our partners, we've led diplomatic talks to try to silence the guns and avert a wider famine. The world needs to stop arming the generals, to speak with one voice and tell them, stop tearing your country apart, stop blocking aid to the Sudanese people, end this war now. But people need more than the absence of war. They need a chance to live in dignity. They need to be protected from the ravages of climate change, hunger, and disease. Our administration has invested over $150 billion to make progress and other sustainable development goals. It includes $20 billion for food security, over $50 billion for global health. We've mobilized billions more in private sector investment. We've taken the most ambitious climate action in history. We've moved to rejoin the Paris Agreement on day one. And today, my country is finally on track to cut emissions in half by 2030. On track to honor my pledge to quadruple climate financing to developing nations with $11 billion thus far this year. We've rejoined the World Health Organization, donating nearly 700 million doses of COVID vaccine to 117 countries. We must now move quickly to face Mpox outbreak in Africa. We're prepared to commit $500 million to help African countries prevent and respond to Mpox and to donate 1 million doses of Mpox vaccine now. We call on our partners to match our pledge and make this $1 billion commitment to the people of Africa. Beyond the core necessities of food and health, the United States, the G7, and our partners have embarked on an ambitious initiative to mobilize and deliver significant finance to the developing world. We're working to help countries build out their infrastructure, to clean energy transition, to the digital transformation, to lay new economic foundations for a prosperous future. It's called the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. We've already started to see the fruits of this emerge in Southern Africa and Southeast Asia and in the Americas. We have to keep it going. I want to get things done together. In order to do that, we must build a stronger, more effective, and more inclusive United Nations. The UN needs to adapt and bring new voices and new perspectives. That's why we support reforming and expanding the membership of the UN Security Council. My UN ambassador just laid out our detailed vision to reflect today's world, not yesterday's. It's time to move forward. The Security Council, like the UN itself, needs to go back to the job of making peace, of brokering deals to end wars and suffering. And to stop the spread of the most dangerous weapons, of stabilizing troubled regions in East Africa, from East Africa to Haiti, to Kenya-led mission that's working alongside the Haitian people to turn the tide. We also have a responsibility to prepare our citizens for the future. We'll see more technological change, I argue, in the next 2 to 10 years than we have in the last 50 years. Artificial intelligence is going to change our ways of life, our ways of work, and our ways of war. It could usher in scientific progress at a pace never seen before, and much of it could make our lives better. But AI also brings profound risks, from deep fakes to disinformation, to novel pathogens, to bioweapons. We've worked at home and abroad to define the new norms and standards. This year, we achieved the first ever General Assembly resolution on AI to start developing global rules of the road. We also announced a declaration on the responsible use of AI, signed by 60 countries in this chamber. But let's be honest, this is just the tip of the iceberg, what we need to do to manage this new technology. Nothing is certain about how AI will evolve or how it will be deployed. No one knows all the answers. My fellow leaders, it's with humility I offer 2 questions. First, how do we as an international community govern AI? As countries and companies race to uncertain frontiers, we need an equally urgent effort to ensure AI's safety, security, and trustworthiness. As AI grows more powerful, it also must grow more responsive to our collective needs and values. Benefits of all must be shared equitably. It should be harnessed to narrow, not deepen, digital divides. Second, we ensure that AI supports rather than undermines the core principles that human life has value and all humans deserve dignity. We must make certain that the awesome capabilities of AI will be used to uplift and empower everyday people, not to give dictators more powerful shackles on the human spirit. In the years ahead, there may well be no greater test of our leadership than how we deal with AI. Let me close with this. Even as we navigate so much change, one thing must not change. We must never forget who we're here to represent. We, the people. These are the first words of our Constitution, the very idea of America. They inspired the opening words of the UN Charter. I made the preservation of democracy the central cause of my presidency. This summer, I faced a decision whether to seek a second term as president. It was a difficult decision. Being president has been the honor of my life. There's so much more I want to get done. As much as I love the job, I love my country more. I decided after 50 years of public service, it's time for a new generation of leadership to take my nation forward. My fellow leaders, let us never forget, some things are more important than staying in power. It's your people. It's your people that matter the most. Never forget, we are here to serve the people, not the other way around. Because the future will be won by those who unleash the full potential of their people, to breathe free, to think freely, to innovate, to educate, to live and love openly without fear. That's the soul of democracy. It does not belong to any one country. I've seen it all around the world. And the brave men and women who ended apartheid, brought down the Berlin Wall, fight today for freedom and justice and dignity. We saw it, that universal yearning for rights and freedom in Venezuela, where millions cast their vote for change that hadn't been recognized. But it can't be denied. The world knows the truth. We saw in Uganda, LGBT activists demanding safety, recognition of their common humanity. We've seen citizens across the world peacefully choosing their future, from Ghana to India to South Korea, nations representing 1/4 of humanity who will hold elections this year alone. It's remarkable, the power of we the people, that makes me more optimistic about the future than I've ever been. Since I was first elected to the United States Senate in 1972, every age faces its challenges. I saw it as a young man. I see it today. But we are stronger than we think. We're stronger together than alone. What the people call impossible is just an illusion. Nelson Mandela taught us, and I quote, "It always seems impossible until it's done." It always seems impossible until it's done. My fellow leaders, there's nothing that's beyond our capacity if we work together. Let's work together. God bless you all, and may God protect all those who seek peace. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the United States of America. May I request representatives to remain seated while we suspend the meeting for 5 minutes before resuming to hear the next speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
Senhoras e senhores, retomam seus assentos.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. That's disorderly. Okay. The meeting is resumed. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Recep Tayyip Erdogan, President of the Republic of Turkey. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Sayın Başkan,
Mr. President, dear heads of states and governments, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, on behalf of myself, my country, and my nation, I greet you with my most heartfelt feelings and respect. I'm honored to have the opportunity to address the United Nations General Assembly once again today. Well, I hope that the 79th General Assembly will be a blessing for our countries and for the entire humanity. I would like to congratulate Mr. Francis on the completion of his term as President of the General Assembly and wish success to Mr. Young as he takes over. I would like to express here our pleasure to see the representative of our friend and brother Palestine in his rightful place among the member states as a result of long struggles. I hope that this historic step will be the final turning point on the road leading to Palestine's membership to the United Nations. The international community and all of us in the human family must fulfill our obligation to the Palestinian people without further ado, that haven't done already. Distinguished guests, I know that there are certain crises that you're monitoring on TV, and those are the crises that we are going through every day, and we're trying to manage them. That's why today I'm not talking representing a country that is situated far away from tensions, but instead that is found at the very heart of tension and war. Some people will be critical of us, but despite that fact, today, on the common rostrum of the human race, we will speak of the truth frankly and openly. Right now, the United Nations, under the roof of which we are found today, were established in the aftermath of the Second World War, in which millions of people have lost their lives to maintain international peace and security. With the establishment of the United Nations, expectations for global stability, peace, and justice were reborn, and hopes for peace were sprouted again. To put it bluntly, unfortunately, in the last few years, the United Nations has failed to fulfill its founding mission and has gradually become a dysfunctional structure. The world is bigger than five is my motto, it's my credo. And this credo represents our common values, and we need those values more than ever in this day and age. International justice cannot be left in the will of five privileged member states of the Security Council. And the most dramatic example to that is the war, the massacre that has been going on in Gaza for the last 350 days. And since October 7, 41,000 Palestinians have been killed in the continuous Israeli attacks. 41,000 lives, 41,000 people, mostly children and women, were ruthlessly taken away. And no one knows where more than 10,000 people are, most of which are children. And likewise, 100,000 people were injured, maimed, or they lost their limbs. 172 journalists were killed while trying to do their job under very difficult circumstances. And more than 500 medics have been killed while they were trying to save lives. Humanitarian aid workers and the United Nations personnel who came to the rescue of the people of Gaza who were struggling with hunger and thirst were killed. More than 215 United Nations personnel. They hit marketplaces, tent, and camps where the refugees were sheltered. They hit 820 mosques and 3 churches that shouldn't have been touched even in war. And they deliberately hit dozens of hospitals, hundreds of schools, more than 130 ambulances carrying patients. They shredded the Charter of the United Nations from the rostrum of the United Nations and shamelessly challenged the whole world, who are people of conscience, from this very rostrum. They challenged them. My friends, leaked images from Israel's prisons, which it has turned into concentration camps, clearly show what kind of barbarianism we are facing. As a result of Israeli attacks, Gaza has become the world's largest cemetery for women and children. More than 17,000 children were targeted by Israeli bullets and bombs. Hind Recep was only 6 years old. He and his family were seeking safety when their car was hit by Israeli forces. He lost everything. He lost his mother, father, siblings, cousins. He lost all the hopes he had packed, and only he survived. He waited desperately for rescue for 12 days. Will you come to take me? I'm fearful. Was waiting for a helping hand to reach out to him for 12 days. Despite the level of our world has reached, despite the technology at our disposal, despite our organizations with huge budgets employing tens of thousands of personnel, as a human family of 8 billion inhabitants, we haven't yet managed to rescue a 6-year-old girl which is actually like an injured sparrow trapped under the rubble that was shaking before our eyes. Hundreds of Gazan children died and are still dying because they cannot find a morsel of a dry bread, a sip of water, and a bowl of soup. In Gaza, not only children are dying, but also the United Nations system. The values that the West claims to defend are dying. The truth is dying. The hopes of humanity to live in a more just world are dying one by one. I am asking you bluntly here, openly, frankly. I call out to you, oh, human rights organizations. Are those in Gaza and the West Bank not human beings? Do children in Palestine have no rights? Can't they play out on the streets in their homelands safely? And calling out to the international press organizations, aren't the journalists murdered by Israel on live TV your colleagues whose offices were actually raided as well? I call out to United Nations Security Council. What are you waiting for to prevent the genocide in Gaza, to put a stop to this cruelty, this barbarianism? What are you waiting for to stop Netanyahu and his network, who is endangering the lives of the Palestinian people, which is a part of a mass murder network? And what are you still waiting for to stop them, putting to danger their own people and the entire region for political gain? I would like to call out to the countries supporting Israel in an unconditional manner. How long are you going to be able to carry the shame of witnessing this massacre? Dear friends, while children are dying in Gaza, in Ramallah, in Lebanon, while babies are dying in incubators, unfortunately, the international community has given a very bad test and failed in a big way. What's happening in Palestine, look, is a sign of a great moral collapse. I believe that the peoples of the world, the leaders of countries and international organizations should reflect on this painful picture, upon this painful landscape. And I would like to state very clearly and loudly here, the Israeli government, disregarding basic human rights, trampling on international law at every opportunity, is practicing ethnic cleansing, a clear genocide against a nation, a people, and occupying their lands step by step. Palestinians, whose freedom, independence, and most basic rights have been usurped, are rightfully exercising their legitimate rights of resistance against this occupation and ethnic cleansing. The just resistance of the Palestinian people against the occupiers of their land is too noble. It's honorable and legitimate to be called illegitimate. It's heroic and it's noble. The only reason for Israel's aggression against the Palestinian people is the unconditional support of group of countries. And I would like to wave at my brothers and sisters at the legitimate resistance in Palestine. As I've said before, the support of a group of countries for Israel is the reason why this aggression is still going on. Countries that have a say over Israel are openly complicit in this massacre, with a policy of run for the hare and catch the hound. Those who are supposedly working for a ceasefire in front of the stage continue to send arms and ammunition to Israel so that it can continue its massacres in the background. This inconsistency and this is insincerity. Look, There's a paper that has been going around back and forth since May. Hamas has repeatedly declared its acceptance of the ceasefire offer. But the Israeli government has made it very clear that this is the party that doesn't want peace by constantly dragging its feet, making a settlement of the dispute much more difficult, almost impossible, constantly finding an excuse and sneakily killing its negotiating partner at the time when it was closest to a ceasefire. Israel's stalling and deception should not be given any more credit. In the absence of the implementation, of UN Security Council Resolution number 2735, coercive measures against Israel should be put on the agenda. Israel's behavior has once again demonstrated that it is imperative for the international community to develop a protection mechanism for Palestinian civilians. 70 years ago, just as Hitler was stopped by an alliance of humanity, Netanyahu and his murder network must be stopped by an alliance of humanity. We believe that the General Assembly's authority to recommend the use of force, as in the 1950 Resolution on Unity for Peace, should be considered in this process during this time. An immediate and a permanent ceasefire must be established. Hostages and prisoners must be exchanged. And humanitarian aid must be delivered to Gaza unhindered and uninterrupted. It's very, very important that we extend a helping hand to the people of Gaza, especially before the winter season when conditions on the ground will become even more challenging. Look, right now, 70% of the water supplies and 75% of the bakeries in Gaza have been destroyed. 95% of health centers were partially or completely damaged. 150,000 houses were completely destroyed. 200,000 houses were partially destroyed, and 80,000 houses become uninhabitable. Infectious diseases such as polio and hepatitis are on the rise. The people of Gaza receive only a quarter of the aid they urgently need. That's what they have access to. And as Turkey, we have been providing humanitarian aid to our brothers and sisters in Palestine, and we will keep on doing that. With more than 60,000 tons of aid, Turkey is the country sending the largest amount of aid to Gaza. Likewise, by halting commercial transactions with Israel, we have demonstrated our stance on this issue. Now, during the last couple of weeks, attacks by Israel have been increased in Lebanon, and we are by the side of Lebanese people and the Lebanese government. We can see this truth for what it is. Those who murdered 41,000 people cannot rest until those who gave the orders, pulled the trigger, and dropped the bombs are held accountable for their crimes. We will not heave a sigh of relief. Our conscience will not go silent. The bill for the billions of dollars of damage caused in the cities that have been destroyed, wrecked, and reduced to rubble must and will be compensated by the perpetrators. We support the case brought by the Republic of South Africa at the International Court of Justice to ensure that Israel's crimes do not go unpunished. We will take every step necessary for justice to be served in the case for which we have applied as an intervener or as a party. We will fight for the blood of Ayşenur Ezgi Egi, who was shot in the head and murdered by Israeli soldiers during a peaceful protest in Nablus. And we will fight in all legal remedies, and we will keep on doing that. While a ceasefire in Gaza is urgently needed, the underlying problem in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories. Based on the 1967 borders, an independent, sovereign, and geographically integrated Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital must come into being. This cannot be delayed any longer. I would like it to be known that we are closely following Israel's increasing attacks on our first Qibla, Al-Aqsa Mosque and Haram al-Sharif. I would like to state once again on this podium as Tayyip Erdogan, once again, that I'm not using a language of politics. I am encouraged by our ancestors who have always stood by the side of the victims honorably and nobly. We are a nation that has been on the side of the oppressed and against the oppressors and oppression throughout history. We are such a nation. We welcomed Jews fleeing the Inquisition 500 years ago and Jews fleeing Hitler's concentration camps. We opened our arms wide. We, as a country and a nation, I'll be very clear to say that we have no animosity or hostility towards the people of Israel. We oppose anti-Semitism in the same way we oppose the targeting of Muslims just because of their faith. Our problem is with the massacre policies of the Israeli government. Our problem is with the oppressor and the oppression, just as it was 5 centuries ago. Everybody should know about this. We will always speak of the truth and speak of what's right and what's fair. Even if some people will be uncomfortable, we will continue to shout out the truth and stand by the righteous and boldly say that we will speak of what we know is right, even though it will hurt some people. From here, I would like to thank all the courageous people who show solidarity with the Palestinian people without discrimination of faith, country, language, or religion, and who take to the streets almost every week to raise their voices against the massacres in Gaza. I would like to especially thank the university students and the youth. Distinguished delegates, unfortunately, in the 14th year of the conflict, Syria is still far from stability. The economic and humanitarian situation in the country, in the grip of terrorism and separatist organizations, remains dire. On the basis of UN Security Council Resolution 2254, we hope to advance the political process and achieve national reconciliation. We are determined to sincerely pursue our position in favor of a realistic dialogue. We are very sincere in that regard. Our neighbor Iraq, while continuing its fight against terrorism, is taking decisive steps towards development, reconstruction, and reintegration with its region. And the international community must support Iraq's efforts. In this context, it is important to implement initiatives such as the Development Road Project, which will benefit the entire region on a win-win basis. The success of all these efforts depend on the complete elimination of the terrorist threat in Iraq, in particular the PKK. We are strengthening our common action plan with another neighbor of ours, Iran, in the region in order to establish stability and peace. It's going to contribute tremendously to our efforts. The war in Ukraine has been going on for 3 years, and we are still away from establishing a permanent peace and stability. As the arms race accelerates, the space for diplomacy is shrinking. It's very important that diplomacy and dialogue will ensure territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, and our support for those endeavors of Turkey will continue even strongly. And again, during this process, we are determined to implement the Montreux Convention on the Straits. We will rigorously implement the Montreux Convention. We support the peace process between Azerbaijan and Armenia and hope that this process will be concluded as soon as possible with good news. We support continued high-level contacts between the two countries. And we are focusing on dialogue. Turkey and Armenia, we are also taking positive steps on that track too. Progress in the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace process will have a positive impact on the Turkey-Armenia normalization process. Dear friends, we play a constructive role for the prosperity and peace at the Balkans, of which we are an integral part, and we act in close cooperation with all actors in the region. As a member of the Steering Committee for Peace Implementation Council, we emphasize the importance of the sovereignty, political unity, and territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina on every platform, and continue our contribution to Operation EUFOR Altea. We are successfully continuing the Key 4 command we assumed last year and supporting the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue process. We want to see the Aegean Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean as a zone of stability and prosperity where the legitimate interests of all the parties are concerned can be respected. It is in the common interest of the entire region to enhance cooperation, particularly on the delimitation of maritime jurisdictions in accordance with international law, freedom and safety of navigation, and maritime trade. International maritime law encourages cooperation between littoral states in closed or semi-closed seas, such as the Aegean Sea. Turkey is ready for constructive cooperation on all issues, especially in energy and environment. We have the longest coastline in the Eastern Mediterranean, and Turkey's key role is undeniable. Turkey has legitimate rights and authorities in the western part of the island of Cyprus, while the Turkish Cypriots have legitimate rights in the areas around the world. It has been 50 years since the Cyprus peace operation and 61 years since the Cyprus issue emerged as a result of the Greek Cypriot usurpation of the partnership state. From that day until today, peace and tranquility have prevailed on the island. It was always the Turkish Cypriots and Turkey who put forth the sincere will to bring about a just, lasting, and sustainable solution to the Cyprus issue. The federation model is now completely outdated, and we fully support the vision of a two-state solution with two different nations put forward by the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. The sovereign, equality, and equal international status of the Turkish Cypriots which are the vested rights of the Turkish Cypriots, must be re-registered and the isolation must end. Today, I once again invite the international community to recognize the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus and to establish diplomatic, political, and economic relations. We actively support the stabilization of Libya and the preservation of the unity and integrity of the country. We call on all states to sincerely stand by Libya at this very sensitive time and contribute to building trust between the parties. We must do more to end the conflict in Sudan. We all have a responsibility to deliver humanitarian assistance to the millions of Sudanese people displaced by the conflict. With its young and dynamic population, rich natural resources, and vast fertile lands, Africa has enormous potential. Based on the principles of equal partnership and mutual respect, hand in hand with the peoples of Africa, we support the continent's efforts for peace, stability, and development. We will continue to stand in full solidarity with our African brothers and sisters. As part of our initiatives, we are strengthening our deep-rooted ties with Asia. We are deepening our engagement with our partner regional organizations such as ASEAN, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the Pacific Islands Forum. We keep our will to develop our relations with BRICS, which brings together emerging economies alive. We share a deep-rooted history with the countries of Central Asia, and we are further strengthening our cooperation on bilateral and multilateral grounds. Our Organization of Turkic States is gradually turning into a center of attraction. The organization is becoming an exemplary model of cooperation with the contributions of observer members Hungary and the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. We will further strengthen our unity and our togetherness as the Turkic world. And within the framework of respect for China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, we are in close dialogue with China to protect the fundamental rights and freedoms of Uyghur Turks, with whom we have strong historical, cultural, and humanitarian ties. We endeavor to build on the friendly ties we have established with the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. Distinguished delegates, we must work together to address global injustice. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals concept of leaving no one behind is a guiding principle for these efforts. As one of the largest aid donors relative to its gross domestic product, Turkey's development cooperation activities contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We contribute to efforts to ensure fair, inclusive growth and development in all international platforms, especially the G20, of which we are a member. We approach technological breakthroughs not as a source of new injustice and conflicts, but as a source of a more prosperous future, such as AI. We believe that all nations should equally benefit from the transformative power of these breakthrough technologies. The United Nations Technology Bank for Least Developed Countries, which we are hosting, is a concrete manifestation of our efforts in this direction. But unfortunately, the cyber terror attacks that took place in Lebanon last week show us once again how deadly these technologies can be used as weapons. I approach the climate change issue from that same perspective. No country can tackle emission reductions and climate change adaptation alone. The most important issues for developing countries are financing, technology transfer, and capacity building. I sincerely believe that the COP29 climate summit in Baku will contribute to the solution of these issues. At the summit, we expect to launch important additional initiatives and unveil our long-term low-emission development strategy and the zero waste initiative that became a reality under the auspices of my spouse, Madam Emine Erdogan. And with mutual agreements, we have taken our domestic affairs and initiatives to international agendas. I would like to ask everybody to support our endeavors in that regard. We see Islamophobia, xenophobia, and racism creeping over the world like a poison ivy. We can see that every week attacks are taking place upon our mosques and our holy book of Quran. In the middle of Europe, people's homes are set on fire and lives are taken because of their ethnic and religious affiliation. Their lives are taken away from them and their fundamental rights are being suspended. And nobody can ignore this growing danger any longer. On March 15th, 2024, we expect a special envoy to combat Islamophobia to be appointed at the United Nations as soon as possible, as envisaged in the draft resolution adopted on March the 15th. Today, I would like to draw your attention once again to the danger that I raised last year on this podium. Attacks on the institution of family, the pillar of society, are increasing. The disgrace staged at the opening of the 2024 Olympic Games has revealed the extent of the threat we face as humanity. A sporting event watched by innocent children and hundreds of millions of people of all ages and beliefs has been used as a tool for a sexist propaganda. It was actually a parade of bad scenes. Those disturbing scenes of evil have wounded not only the Catholic world, the Christian world, but everyone who respects the sacred values. The issue of desexualization is no longer an orientation, but a global imposition. It literally became a war against the sacred and human nature. We are facing a multidimensional, comprehensive, and ruthless project of destruction who are speaking out and who are reacting to this evil. Anyone who raises a voice for this annihilation project is silenced and targeted by lynch campaigns. And Turkey is determined to break this siege and resist the climate of fear. To this end, we became a member of the United Nations Friends of the Family Group. Inshallah, God willing, together with other member countries, we will not hesitate to defend the family, the human being, and the human nature. I invite all the countries that share our sentiments to shoulder this struggle. With these thoughts in mind, I wish that the 79th General Assembly will be auspicious for all humanity. I greet you all once again with love and respect. May peace be with you and may you remain in health.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Turkey, the Assembly will hear an address by His Majesty King Abdullah II Ibn al-Hussein, King of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. I request protocol to escort His Majesty and invite him to address the Assembly.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Your Excellencies. Over the past quarter century, I have stood at this podium amidst regional conflicts, global upheavals, and humanitarian crises that have profoundly tested our global community. It often feels that there was not a moment when our world was not in turmoil. And yet, I cannot recall a time of greater peril than this. Our United Nations is facing a crisis that strikes at its very legitimacy and threatens a collapse of global trust and moral authority. The UN is under attack, literally and figuratively. For nearly a year, the sky blue flag flying over UN shelters and schools in Gaza has been powerless to protect innocent civilians from Israeli military bombardment. UN aid trucks sit motionless just miles away from starving Palestinians. Humanitarian workers who proudly wear the emblem of this institution are disparaged and targeted. And the rulings of the UN's International Court of Justice are defied, its opinions disregarded. So it's no surprise that both inside and outside this hall, trust in UN's cornerstone principles and ideals is crumbling. The harsh reality many see is that some nations are above international law, that global justice does bend to the will of power, and that human rights are selective, a privilege to be granted or denied at will. We cannot stand for that. And we must recognize that undermining our international institutions and global frameworks is one of the gravest threats to our global security today. Ask yourselves, if we are not nations united in the conviction that all people are equal in rights, dignity, and worth, and that all countries are equal in the eyes of the law, what kind of world does that leave us with? Your Excellencies, the attacks of October 7th on Israeli civilians last year were condemned by countries all over the world, including Jordan. But the unprecedented scale of terror unleashed on Gaza since that day is beyond any justification. The Israeli government's assault has resulted in one of the fastest death rates in recent conflicts, one of the fastest rates of starvation caused by war, the largest cohort of child amputees and unprecedented levels of destruction. This Israeli government has killed more children, more journalists, more aid workers, and more medical personnel than any other war in recent memory. And let us not forget the attacks on the West Bank. There, since October 7th, the Israeli government has killed more than 700 Palestinians, among them 160 children. Palestinians held in Israeli detention centers exceed 10,700, including 400 women and 730 children. 730 children. Over 4,000 Palestinians have been forced from their homes and lands. Armed settler violence has surged, and entire villages have been displaced. And in Jerusalem, a flagrant violations of the historical and legal status quo at Muslim and Christian holy sites continue unabated under the protection and encouragement of members of the Israeli government. To be clear, this is in the West Bank, not Gaza. Almost 42,000 Palestinians have been killed since October 7th. So is it any wonder that many are questioning how can this war not be perceived as deliberately targeting the Palestinians? The level of civilian suffering cannot be written off as unavoidable collateral. I grew up a soldier in a region that is all too familiar with conflict. But there is nothing familiar about this war and the violence unleashed since October 7th. In the absence of global accountability, repeated horrors are normalized, threatening to create a future where anything is permitted, anywhere in the world. Is that what we want? Now is the time to ensure the protection of the Palestinian people. It is the moral duty of this international community to establish a protection mechanism for them across the occupied territories. This will guarantee the safety of Palestinians and Israelis from extremists who are taking our region to the brink of an all-out war. That includes those who continue to propagate the idea of Jordan as an alternative homeland. So let me be very, very clear. That will never happen. We will never accept the forced displacement of Palestinians, which is a war crime. No country in the region benefits from escalation. We have seen that clearly in the dangerous developments in Lebanon over the past few days. This has to stop. For years, the Arab world has extended a hand to Israel through the Arab Peace Initiative, offering full recognition and normalization in exchange for peace. But consecutive Israeli governments, emboldened by years of impunity, have rejected peace and chosen confrontation instead. Impunity gathers force. Left unchecked, it gains momentum. Palestinians have borne more than 57 years of occupation and oppression. During this time, the Israeli government has been allowed to cross one red line after another. But now, Israel's decades-long impunity is becoming its own worst enemy, and the consequences are everywhere. The Israeli government has been accused of genocide at the ICJ. Expressions of outrage at its conduct are echoing around the world. Cities everywhere have seen mass protests, and calls for sanctions are growing louder. International frustration with Israel has long been mounting, but it has never been more exposed. For decades, Israel has projected itself as a thriving Western-style democracy in the Middle East. But the brutality of the war on Gaza has forced the world to look closer. Now many see Israel through the eyes of its victims. And the contradiction, the paradox, is too jarring. The modern advanced Israel admired from afar, and the Israel that Palestinians have experienced firsthand, simply cannot coexist. Israel will eventually be entirely one or the other. That is the choice its leaders and its people will have to make. To live by the democratic values of freedom, justice, and equality for all, or to risk further isolation and rejection. Over and over, we have watched Israel try to achieve security through military means. Each escalation is followed by a pause until the next deadlier one. And for years, the global community has taken the path of least resistance, accepting the status quo of the ongoing military occupation of Palestinians, all the while paying lip service to the two-state solution. But it has never been more evident that the current status quo is untenable. And as the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion underscored 2 months ago, it is unequivocally illegal. The court's opinion bears a moral imperative to us all. The obligation it carries is one that our nations cannot afford to ignore for the sake of our world, as well as the future for Palestinians and Israelis alike. Because both peoples deserve to live their lives in dignity, free of violence and fear. And the only way to achieve that is a just peace, one grounded in international law, justice, equal rights, and mutual recognition. That is something we, as nations and people everywhere, can and must unite around. Your Excellencies, the world is watching, and history will judge us by the courage we show. And it is not just the future that will hold us accountable, so will the people of the here and now. They will judge whether we as the United Nations will surrender to inaction or will fight to uphold the principles that anchor this institution and our world. Right now, they are asking whether we will stand by as parents watch their children waste away, as doctors watch their patients die for lack of basic medical supplies, and as more innocent lives are lost because the world failed to act. This war must end. Hostages and detainees must return home. But every day we wait is one day too long for far too many. So I call on all countries to join Jordan in enforcing an international Gaza humanitarian gateway, a massive relief effort to deliver food, clean water, medicine, and other vital supplies to those in desperate need. because humanitarian aid should never be a tool of war. Whatever our politics, one truth is undeniable. No people should have to endure such unprecedented suffering, abandoned and alone. We cannot surrender the future to those who thrive on division and conflict. I urge all nations of conscience to unite with Jordan in the critical weeks ahead on this mission. Almost a year into this war, our world has failed politically, but our humanity must not fail the people of Gaza any longer. Echoing the words of my father from 64 years ago at the 15th session of the General Assembly, I pray that this community of nations may have the courage to decide wisely and fearlessly, and will act with urgent resolve that this crisis and our conscience demand. My father was a man who fought for peace to the very end. And like him, I refuse to leave my children or your children a future we have given up on. Thank you.
En nombre de la Asamblea.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the King of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan.
La Asamblea escuchará.
The Assembly will now hear an address by the President of my country, the Republic of Guatemala, His Excellency, Mr. César Bernardo Arevalo de León. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly, and this is a very special honor for me.
Excelentísima.
Your Excellency Carlos Rodriguez, Vice President of the 79th session of the General Assembly. His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations Organization, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, honorable delegates, ladies and gentlemen.
The
people of Guatemala greet the world. I greeted you in the language of the Quiché people, one of the ancestral and most influential communities of Guatemala. Their power and that of the various peoples of Guatemala is what sustains our government. It is the strength of our country. It is the resounding voice of those that have not been heard, of those that have been marginalized, but who have a lot to say, a lot to contribute, who have a place to play in building our collective future. I'm here as a result of two clear expressions of popular will. The first, a vote which unanimously rejected the representatives of the authoritarian past of Guatemala, and it granted me the honor of the presidency to lead the national effort to move towards a future of justice, equality, and progress. The second was the defense that the society of Guatemala, by various means of expression, reaffirmed and defended on the streets with regard to the decision that they took at the polls when a corrupt minority attempted to impose their further rule and cheat democracy. Our democracy will not be complete, it could not exist, without the impetus which is so decisive and courageous of the Mayan people of Guatemala, of people of mixed descent, of the Garinagu people of the Caribbean and of the Xinca people. It is a democracy that comes from the four corners of the country. From these four peoples, together we form a nation. And the role of our government is to give a sense of unity to this diversity and to move forwards towards a prosperous and inclusive future. I would like to express particular thanks on the part of Guatemala to the countries, peoples, and governments that were together with us, together with the people of Guatemala during this historic gesture in 2023, and for the support that they continue to give us in our efforts to rescue our democratic institutions. And we are doing this through dialogue, a dialogue which is part of a great national consensus, something which all Guatemalans share over and above our ideological differences, our cultural diversity, our various ways of seeing the world. And I'm sure that in this forum, everyone can identify with this consensus. Namely, we cannot continue to tolerate corruption. Corruption, when the few abuse what belongs to everyone to benefit themselves, is like an anchor that chains us to the past, and it prevents us from growing, from prospering, and building a society which is based on the common good. In the case of Guatemala, corruption's roots are buried in our authoritarian past of repression, of political violence, of social exclusion. But we are breaking free from this. We are freeing ourselves from the chains of the dark past. And what we are seeing reborn is a young, creative, vital, joyous, but anxious nation. Young people who will not be silent in the light of injustices and in the light of corruption. A diverse community that is building the future. A future where everyone has a seat at the table, where opportunities multiply, where cooperation and solidarity optimize talent, creativity, and individual efforts, where parents are able to sleep peacefully, knowing that health and educational opportunities for their children will be guaranteed, where work will be fairly remunerated, and where prosperity will not require immoral acts of corruption, where the earth, our earth, will be treated with gratitude and respect, and it will give us in exchange clean spaces for us to work, to live, to recreate ourselves, to grow. This is the future that we are building for Guatemala. And this future is not emerging in a vacuum. For us, we see it as coming from within, from our principles, from our own values, from our own cosmovision. Our government is made up of the diverse peoples of Guatemala, and these are the values and the vision of these four peoples. They are the instruments that we are using to navigate this ocean of transformation. In the same way, this very important forum, and so necessary for global coexistence and for the progress of all nations, must look inwards and return to its fundamental values and use them to navigate the complex reality that we are facing today as a planet. The time has come to rescue multilateralism, to revitalize dialogue for peace, and to take concrete actions in order to resolve the most urgent problems afflicting us. Let us begin at the beginning. War, this horror that motivated the opening of this global forum, has commanded once again our attention. It is becoming a permanent reality, but in the recent last 2 years has become desperate, an intensity that we did not expect. We cannot tolerate it. We cannot tolerate war. We cannot ignore international conflicts that affect the peace and security of us all. We must not abandon hope of a world without war, of a future of peace. Guatemala would like to reiterate its solidarity with countries that are suffering from armed conflicts and unjustified wars. We would call upon the members of this assembly to redouble regional and international efforts so that we can find peaceful solutions to our disputes based on respect for international law and international humanitarian law and the fundamental principle of human dignity. We cannot accept any violation of the United Nations Charter or of the Security Council resolutions by any member state of this organization, not in Ukraine, not in Gaza, not in Sudan, and not in any other part of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, rescuing multilateralism as a fundamental principle for the international system is an urgent necessity. And for each and every one of the nations that make up this forum, it's an unavoidable commitment if we really and sincerely want a future of peace and progress. Only with substantial reforms can we resume the path that we set out on when this organization was founded in 1945. A multipolar world needs new focuses which will be adapted to emerging needs of nations. We support the reform of the Security Council. Once again, it should resume a collective approach that is pacifist and democratic in the way it acts. It's not acceptable that decisions are not adopted in favor of peace because of the right exercised by the few. I'm referring to the right of veto. And with that, avoiding decisions being taken that are hard-hitting against those states which repeatedly violate the charter of this organization. Let us recall to the members of the Security Council that it is their primary responsibility to maintain international peace and international security, and that in the performance of its functions, it must proceed according to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. Madam Vice President, Guatemala contributes as part of our commitment to peace with 213 officials, military observers and military staff in 7 of the United Nations peacekeeping missions. And this is a contribution which fills us with pride. Our professionalism and experience in this area have led us to be recognized internationally as one of the main countries to make the greatest contribution to peace in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I would like to share with this General Assembly that we are in the process of finalizing administrative steps to ensure our participation and deployment as a military police contingent in the multinational security support mission in Haiti, pursuant to Resolution 2699 of 2023 of the United Nations Security Council. Guatemala expresses its readiness to support all efforts aimed at re-establishing security and stability in Haiti, the first contemporary independent nation of this hemisphere, and with which we are unified. Together with all countries of the America, we share historic links of responsibility. We have known for a long time that an attack against human dignity in any part of the world is an attack against all of humanity. And that's why peace is such a global imperative. We can all make a contribution. We all must do our part. This is the idea that is at the heart and the existence of this organization. In the same way, this organization has the obligation to maintain and increase its cooperation to ensure the protection of migrants, displaced persons, people who, for political, social, or economic or environmental reasons, have taken their lives to other countries. Our government has committed to transforming the relationship between the state of Guatemala and Guatemalan citizens residing outside the country, because they continue to be an integral part of our nation, and their work is a fundamental part of our economy. We are doing this through a strategy that makes it possible for them to have effective participation in our national development, converting them into project partners in order to improve the living conditions for the families that have decided to remain in Guatemala. In the future that we are building, migration is a right, an option. It's not a sentence arising from the lack of opportunities or from violence or from hunger. Over the last decade, Guatemala has moved from being a country of origin for migrants and increasingly one of transit and return, and also to a lesser extent, a place of destination. Our commitment is to give dignified treatment to all people that arrive on our shores, consistent with the treatment that we demand for Guatemalans abroad. Our state is making substantial changes in the way that we protect and care for migrant persons. We have identified areas that need improvement and where we can offer greater opportunities in order to strengthen our management of migration flows, to ensure that it is orderly, regular, and safe. It's my personal conviction, that of my government and of the broad majority of Guatemalans, that all migrants deserve to have the opportunity of a dignified life and to ensure that their fundamental rights are respected, irrespective of the causes that led them to migrate. For this reason, we firmly believe in the work that is being done through the United Nations system. Guatemala promotes the achievement of the 23 goals established in the Global Compact for Migration, for safe, orderly, and regular migration, promoting international cooperation in the area of migration. With that same conviction, we welcomed 135 Nicaraguan brothers who were released from arbitrary detention by their government. Our commitment is that Guatemala will always be a space for dignity and freedom for those who come to our country, particularly for Central Americans who are, in accordance with our constitution, our history, and are generally felt to be our people, fellow citizens and brothers and sisters. Guatemala reaffirms its commitment to the fundamental principles of democracy, such as those that are in the Inter-American Democratic Charter, and which is a basic fundamental principle of the political organization of our peoples. We reject in our hemisphere and throughout the world any attempt to suppress the aspirations for freedom and justice that are expressed by the peoples of the world through free and democratic processes, as we are seeing currently in Venezuela and Nicaragua. The principles of democracy are fundamental in order to preserve freedom, dignity, and inclusive and equitable prosperity for humanity. Madam Vice President, before this General Assembly, I would like to reaffirm the commitment of Guatemala to permanently and in a lasting manner resolve before the International Court of Justice the insular and maritime and territorial dispute with the brotherly country and neighborly country of Belize. By opting for dialogue and the international legal mechanisms, we have demonstrated that peaceful means and respect for multilateral institutions are the most effective way to resolve disputes between countries. We are confident that this process will make it possible to bring about a just and lasting solution that respects the rights and dignity of both countries. This act is an act of faith, of our faith, in international law, and our commitment to lasting peace, not only for Guatemala and Belize, but also as an example for the region and for the world. Madam Vice President, the urgency of the challenge that we are facing suggests that we take concrete action and not just limit ourselves to rhetoric. It has been said very often that the time has now come to move from words to action. Conflicts and migration in Central America are fueled by what we consider to be the most pressing global challenge, namely the climate crisis. It is endangering our systems, our economy, our food chain, our survival itself. We are at a critical juncture for saving the current and future generations. Climate change is a devastating reality that is affecting humanity, which affects us today, but which will have disastrous consequences for the future. Guatemala, despite being a hugely diverse country, is extremely vulnerable to extreme climate events that cause natural disasters, flooding, landslides, fires, and an increase in temperatures that we have all been witness to this year. Our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is minimal. Nevertheless, we, like few other countries, are suffering the onslaught of these extreme climate events. We are adapting ourselves to this reality and reducing the vulnerability of our country. In 2025, we will be presenting an update of our nationally determined contribution in fulfillment of the commitments established in the Paris Agreement. But we must recall here in this forum that the responsibility to address this crisis is a shared one. We have to act to resolve it, those that are suffering the onslaught of this crisis, but also those that have caused it. We issue an urgent call to the major powers to assume the leadership role that is theirs, as well as we appeal to the moral and financial responsibility with the nations, with the countries that have suffered the worst effects. The time to act is now, and it's essential that the next COP, COP29, to be held in Azerbaijan, be a success. The commitment of Guatemala to achieve this goal is total. Dear friends, Vice President, Guatemala is changing, and this change implies a transformation of our relationship with the world. We are doing what we can to contribute to the goals of this organization, and this contribution is born of a commitment to the norms and values of global peace and security, but also it comes from a democratic mandate that we have been given. Our people have the conviction that democracy is a necessary condition for progress and for well-being. Guatemala has an authoritarian past, and that's a very recent past, a tragic past that many of you will be aware of. Nevertheless, expressing our vocation for the freedom of our people, and with significant assistance from the international community, we have taken a turn towards promoting and defending human rights, earnestly confronting our historic problems and debts, and assuming courageously the responsibility to resolve the current problems that we have. The recent visit of the High Commissioner and the immediate renewal of the presence of his office in Guatemala are a testimony of this commitment. Guatemala has renewed its commitment to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals with the recent adoption of the Pact for the Future as part of the Summit of the Future. We are convinced that economic growth alone does not produce development. Cooperation, protection of the environment, social inclusion, respect for and the promotion of human dignity and security are indispensable preconditions for development. Guatemala is changing. And we are moving towards a future that is more equitable, where development and progress will reach every corner of the country, particularly the most abandoned sectors of the population, where everyone, irrespective of their origin, will have the possibility to build a dignified and full life. This is a natural aspiration of all peoples. We will do our part to bring this about in Guatemala, and we will work together to bring this about where it is needed. But we're doing this because we know that the world is changing. This change depends on our efforts as United Nations in this forum. It is unavoidable, and it is just beginning. It is for the well-being of our peoples and our nations. This is the vision that was at the heart of the foundation of this organization 79 years ago. This is the vision that should guide our efforts today as humanity. And I conclude quoting the sacred book of the Mayan people, the Popol Vuh, as follows. Let everyone stand up and advance. Let no one be left behind. Thank you very much.
En nombre de
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank His Excellency, President of the Republic of Guatemala,